Okay, we started to live. Okay. Okay, so let's we are starting right now. Good evening, our honor guests. Today, we are going to we are proudly to present about our event and welcome you to our entrepreneurship sundowner on investing in startups to impact the SDGs. And today I am Prapasan Sirvishai. I will be your host from the Sustainability and Entrepreneurship Center. And we have Kun Alex Mavro with us. And
Sorry, I couldn't unmute in time. Having trouble with this machine. Here I am.
hi, Kun Alex. So please welcome our speaker, Mr. Dominic Muller, a principal investment specialist at ADB.
Hi, thank you. Thanks. I'm very happy to be on the show. Thanks for the invite.
And with Kun Surawat from your team, or Kun Sam, our Director of Sustainability and Entrepreneurship Center. Please welcome Kun Sam and Kun Dominic. Sawadee ka.
Sawadee ka. Hello, everyone, and good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So just before we jump in, just wanted to say I'm very, very excited. We are very excited because from the name of our center, we are the Sustainability and Entrepreneurship Center. In the history of our school and the center, we actually used to have two different centers, one for each of those topics, if you will. And we ended up putting them together because we have a thesis that they belong together. Sustainability needs entrepreneurship and innovation in order to help it meet its massive challenges. And entrepreneurship needs purpose and values to make sure that we innovate and develop, but in the right direction and in an ultimately sustainable direction. So with all that said, we're very excited to talk about today's subject because it's just smack in the middle of that intersection between those two things. So thank you again, Dominic Meller, for joining us from ADB and ADB Ventures. So before we jump into the sort of the details of the topic, if I can take a moment to step back and just ask you a little bit about yourself, just your own personal journey, and perhaps leading up to how you ended up here.
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and thanks again for inviting me onto this program and to share my experience of setting up, operationalizing ADB Ventures. So a bit about myself. I grew up in Hong Kong. I'm from Hong Kong. So I guess my interest in economic development and, so to speak, the inequalities in society came about from my upbringing in Hong Kong. So as you know, Hong Kong is, I guess there are some parallels with Thailand. It's very prosperous on the surface, but also there's a lot of underlying inequalities. And at the time, mainland China was also still really at a very early stage of its own growth story. And so, seeing on the one hand, high-rise, shiny buildings, and the other hand, you seeing, real working class, low-income groups, I always ask myself, why was there such a big inequality? So I guess that's what led me into, generally speaking, a Korean development, although a lot of people don't really understand what development is. It's really about trying to understand policies and what can be public sector interventions, private sector interventions in ensuring that the wealth from economic growth is shared, not just this generation, but also between generations, i.e. Managing sustainably environmental resources. So with that sort of early childhood upbringing, I've had a pretty nomadic experience. I've worked in banking. I've worked both commercial and development. I've worked as an entrepreneur for a while. I've lived in Papua New Guinea. I've worked in Africa. I've worked in the Middle East. And I'd worked almost everywhere except Asia, which was my home where I grew up. And so fairly late into my life, I had moved back to Asia, and I joined, of course, the Asian Development Bank. And they, of all places, they sent me back to Papua New Guinea, which is where it all started, including my cocoa plantation. But I was able to then go back to Papua New Guinea in a very different capacity, working for a fairly large organization that has the power to convene and bring together a lot of resources, which was interesting, working not within government or within the society there, but more as an observer outsider. Then they transferred me to Vietnam, which is then where I got back involved in supporting entrepreneurship. I started a program called the Mekong Business Initiative that supported entrepreneurship across Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, working with corporates, designing corporate innovation programs, early stage entrepreneurship, incubators, advisory, supporting local governments. And then I joined ADB Ventures team. ADB wanted to operationalize and set up a venture arm about a year and a half ago. I joined and brought some of my experience together with other guys from the VC industry, and happy to say that we just launched ADB Ventures just this year. So that's my journey.
Wow, that's a tremendous journey. I would imagine it comes in quite handy because of the perspective it must give you, which is something probably pretty important for what you're doing now. And you are in Thailand now, is that correct?
I forgot to say, yeah, I am in Thailand. So I'm very sorry that I'm sorry that like I wish we were in like, you know, I was really looking forward after all these months of lockdown and like doing these kind of virtual video calls. I was so looking forward to actually meeting people in person and coming to the SaaS Business School. So when you told me that this was going virtual because of the protests, I was sad to not be able to come. So yeah.
Definitely another time. We'd love to still do that at another time. Definitely. So with ADB, before we even drill down to ADB Ventures, perhaps for the benefit of folks who might not know about ADB itself, could you please share a little bit about that organization as a whole and what it does?
Sure. So ADB is the largest development bank in Asia Pacific. I always forget the number. I think we've got 68 shareholders now. The shareholders of ADB are governments. So from the very smallest country, which is Niue, that has 3,000 people, to you know, obviously to China, Korea, Japan, but also non-regional countries. So the US is a member. A lot of European countries are members. So they basically pooled their capital, and through ADB therefore has a AAA rating, which allows us to leverage a huge amounts of resources through capital markets. And we use these resources to finance primarily infrastructure development projects in our member countries. So here in Thailand, we're financing some of your metro lines. Across the Mekong region, we finance university campuses, large national expressways. We also provide advisory support to the government. So I think recently here in Thailand, we did the COVID-19 support, budget support to the government. But what a lot of people don't know is that around 20% of ADB's operations is purely private sector. So we also do impact investing, provide debt, equity, guarantees to private entities. And we've been doing that for a good part of 2 decades. Until recently, a lot of our funding support to the private sector was more larger scale financing, private equity and up. We haven't done gone into the venture space yet. So what we're doing now with ADB Ventures is actually quite new for us.
Right. So this is much earlier stage than the traditional ADB investment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So given that, leads us right into ADB Ventures itself. Can you please introduce what it is and what you guys do?
Yeah. So it's essentially the venture arm of the ADB, and we we focus on supporting and investing in early stage technology companies that are solving the biggest development problems in Asia. So we are still investing for commercial returns, although albeit we also look at impact. So that's why when I stress the word big development problems, because it's not about solving local problems. I mean, of course, it's not to say that local problems are not important. You know, I believe in there's social enterprises out there, there's local ventures, great work being done, and there's support needed for those types of initiatives. But for us, because we are a venture fund, we need a certain scale. So therefore, we're really looking to help entrepreneurs solving some of these big development problems. Until recently, it was difficult for ADB to get involved in this space. I think I mentioned to you earlier that we're a AAA bank. We raise largely public sector funds. And so there's always been this adverseness to doing earlier stage VC funding. So, and that's not just for ADB, but even the World Bank and all the development banks. So I think for ADB Ventures, while to the outside world, it's pretty old school. I mean, ventures have been around a long time. For these large organizations, development type organizations, there's internal innovation that needs to happen to allow us to ring fence a certain segmented portfolio. Because it's pretty, I mean, in the big picture, this venture fund, which is $60 million, we just reached our first close. It's not small for a venture fund, it's not big, but for ADB in the big picture, our overall portfolio size is over $100 billion. So from a portfolio perspective, it's pretty small, but we believe that you know, it can have a big outsized impact for a fairly small amount of money, because it's allowing us to take more risk, invest in much earlier stage companies for developmental impact. But also importantly, we feel that we have an operational network that we built up over decades, i.e. the city governments we work with, the large corps, the financial institutions that are potential adopters of these technology solutions, and therefore provide a path for deployment, validation, and scaling, which is important for these companies, both from a commercial perspective, but also ultimately to generate the impact we want.
Mm-hmm. If I remember correctly, ADB Ventures itself is still divided into a couple of different programs. Is that correct? Sort of.
Yeah, there's essentially two funding sources, and at the moment we have three different activities. So there's the fund, there's something we call ADB Ventures Labs, and there's something we call the seed program.
What are the differences between those?
So we're trying to be able to offer end-to-end support for an entrepreneur that's expanding, operating in emerging markets. And of course, I think some of the valleys of death, so to speak, are pretty well known. We are not, the first valley of death, of course, is during the R&D phase and the product development. We're not there. That's probably more of a mainstream public sector play. We're the private sector arm of the ADB. So the two sort of death valleys or obstacles in that journey of an entrepreneur that we're trying to help is first on market validation of their product solution. And then secondly, it's scaling their deployment. So the products that we have so far are really mapped to these different challenges that are facing entrepreneurs when they operate in emerging markets. So the first one is, if you look at Asia as a whole, apart from, of course, China and there's India increasingly, a lot of markets are fairly small and fragmented, different regulatory regimes, vested interests, incumbents in the traditional industry. So if you're an entrepreneur looking to disrupt, expand in these markets, there's a certain transaction cost to going into these markets, finding your first customer, validating, adapting your solution to a new regulatory regime, new cultures, and so forth. So the first two of our products that we've developed, the labs and the investment fund, are really trying to tackle this issue. So how do we do that? So the ADB Ventures Labs, we look to leverage ADB's operational network. So I mentioned earlier that we work with about 200 plus banks across the region through ongoing credit lines, trade finance. We work with thousands of city governments building urban infrastructure. We work with large agricultural corporations on agricultural supply chain finance. All of these existing clients, they've looked to ADB for finance, but they're increasingly looking for technology. So we essentially try to convene and play an honest middle broker role through our ADB Ventures Labs platform. So we continuously run activities where we source global solutions through partnerships that can be global accelerator partners, other programs supporting early stage startups, curate, filter, and then match some of the top solutions to these end users. That's one service in itself, because you're helping these companies to basically find clients. And we've been doing that in sustainable tourism, sustainable agriculture, inclusive fintech, and the like. When that exercise is done, occasionally we see a really interesting solution that we'd like to potentially invest in, but they're still a little bit too early stage, and there's still a little bit of risk around their ability to really crack this market. That's where the ADB Ventures seed program comes in. We can provide up to $200,000 to these companies in the form of a convertible. So you could think of it as a safe note. We call it a grant, but it actually gives ADB an investment right in these companies on their next round. And then we can observe these companies and also help them to navigate this market and build a program to market pilot their technology in the target market. And then eventually, if that works out well, of course, we have the option to invest. So that's where the Fund 1 comes in. It's equity capital up to $4 million, but typically we invest to 1 to 1.5 million. So those are the different products and how we try to align it to that journey in which the entrepreneur is trying to follow and navigate in these markets.
The way that you just described the labs part, it reminds me of in, let's say, the tech startup ecosystem, the organizations that help match corporates with startups. So typically where the end objective is to enable a POC or a proof of concept opportunity. So you might have a startup, it's got some traction, but it would like to work with a company that could utilize that technology in some way. So would that be a fairly accurate or appropriate comparison? You're kind of doing that, but instead of matching to just to only corporates, you're matching to municipalities, to governments, as well as private companies. Would that be right?
That's right. So under our labs, we actually partner with a lot of these types of corporates providing that service. So we partner with Plug and Play that's doing that service. We partner with Imagine H2O that focuses on water technology. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Often we can just plug into other existing programs, but we also want to bring value, and that's through our networks. So if you talk to your Plug and Plays or your Nest Accelerator program and these partners, they might not have the networks that we have in these sustainability areas. So they might bring process expertise and we bring the networks.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, given that, and again, sort of expanding or extending that comparison, typically from what I recall, those types of matching or those types of programs are targeting slightly more mature startups. So they tend to be past product market fit. They have some traction. So does the same apply for your labs program?
So, it also depends a lot on what the corporates want. So, because when we build these platforms, the idea is that we try to build up our corporate networks on the demand side and then our sourcing networks for the accelerator side, and we make the market. And if we do that, there will be companies that we can support through our investment instruments. But ultimately, what companies these corporates choose to work with will depend on the demand for B2B models or B2G if we're working with governments. So what we tend to find is that, a lot of the time, the corporate partners are looking, it's easier for them to work with companies that have demonstrated at least some traction in their home market, or they're beyond the R&D phase. Certainly, they've got a established product. Now, what stage and how mature a company needs to be, it varies a little bit based on a corporate's appetite to be working with this type of startup. And we see a whole range from just companies that are, almost just beyond MVP stage to companies that are really quite mature.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. Okay, so you have that flexibility and you're really focused on your stakeholders' needs as the part. Okay.
Yeah, so we believe, you're a good citizen, then, in the end, those relationships will help you when you need them as well. So you can't always be just, helping yourself for a platform. Otherwise, it's not a platform that's really convening. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then the main fund, so to speak, the fund one, that's more of a like a classic VC model in terms of, well, it's you mentioned investing in another, I think, 1 million to 1.5 million, something like that. So is that sort
Yeah.
of pre-A, Series A range, somewhere in there?
So yeah, so our average first ticket size would be 500,000 to 3 million, and we can invest up to 4 million. So I'd say pre-Series A to Series A, because we're co-investing. So a lot of these companies are valued at 5 million all the way upwards to 40 million, but average valuations would be about 10, 15 million. So they're not very early stage. I think for the seed stage ones, we'd more likely use the seed program instrument to help them. If we were to invest directly, then typically they would be pre-Series A, but case by case, industry by industry. But to answer your question about whether it mirrors a traditional VC fund, yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, we are looking for commercial returns, and the basic principles of VC portfolio construct that you recognize that most of your investments will fail, that therefore the few investments that make it need to hit a minimal market size. All that applies for us. But we do also segment our portfolio because, broadly speaking, if you look at, for example, we focus on four industries. There's agri-tech, there's clean tech, there's fintech, and then there's health tech. And across these sectors, you have more traditional types of software-driven business models that are, I would say, more in the normal type of business model that VCs invest in, because they can scale very rapidly. Whereas hardware intensive companies, or some of the hard science type, which you often see in clean tech and agri-tech, there's a little bit more uncertainty on the timing and the exit and how long it takes. So if we're doing a play in a software space, then we do realistically think that it can scale really big, and the upside has to be huge for us to justify it, even if we take more risk. But why we would go in with along with another VC is that we see value add we can bring to the other VC and to the company through our networks, whether it's our banking networks or whatever it may be. But on the other hand, we see also interesting plays that are maybe not your traditional VC investment. Sometimes they can involve hardware. They might be almost like a very early infra play. And if you get in early enough, the multiples can be fairly attractive, but I wouldn't say they're like a mainstream VC play, at least not currently.
Now, when you say mention things like hardware, or what sounded like maybe even potentially deep tech to some extent, those types of startups typically have a longer life cycle, or take longer to exit, mature. So are there any considerations there regarding essentially your fund life? Is it because most VCs, I think, are somewhere around like sort of close to the 10-year, 7-10-year range?
Yeah. So we've actually designed our fund life in a way to be longer, to provide more patient capital to that type of investment. So we can hold up to 10 years. So our fund life is actually beyond 10 years, because we have an initial investment period and a wind down period, but the holding period can be 10 years. That doesn't mean to say that everything we invest in, we anticipate and want it to be 10 years.
Right.
But it just gives us an option for when there's a really good company, and for whatever reason that they just need a little bit more time to reach that point, we're going to be more patient with them, and hopefully get a decent return, but also help these companies to generate impact.
Wow. Okay. So that's quite that's different compared to most of the VC community, at least for financial VCs. That's different.
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned that the fact that you co-invest a couple of times. So does that necessarily mean that does it preclude you from being a lead investment then in a deal?
It doesn't completely preclude us, but we generally prefer to follow, at least initially, because venture operations also it's a new play for ADB as a whole. So I think even for us, we're learning by doing, and one way to do that is to lead initially. But for the seed program I mentioned, the ADV Ventures seed, on that one, we don't need to follow. We can go in alone, and then we usually just lock the investment right to the follow-on investment round, and take or not take the valuation on that next round. But for the Fund 1 direct investment, if a company, there's a few deals that we've got in the pipeline where we're kind of going up to 50% and playing kind of a partial role of being lead. But I would say generally, if the company is more mature, we would be investing, 10, 15, 20% of those companies as they get into progressively later rounds.
Okay. And the way you describe the seed program, that sounds closer to being a seed fund, like a seed investment. So given that difference between that and the Fund 1, that is more like pre-Series A and Series A, is there some rough proportion of what sort of allocation between those two funds?
So you mean in terms of the fund capitalization of the two funds, the funding sources?
Right, and ultimately just to reflect, in other words, how much you plan to invest from one fund versus the other. Yes.
Yeah. So for the Fund 1, it's 60 million capitalization, and half the fund is reserved for follow-on. Okay. So the first half is for first check, and so we're looking at about up to 30 investments from Fund 1, excluding follow-on investments, depending on the average size of the ticket. And then for the seed, the total funding is around 5 million, and we can invest up to 200,000. But average size of those maybe 100 to 150,000. So again, there it's it could be anywhere up to about 40 seeds. And it doesn't mean that all those seeds would be converted to Fund 1 investments. Maybe, maybe 40% of those we would exercise the option to invest.
I see. Okay, that's very clear. Thank you. So how about maybe just sort of separate from this more VC type talk, drilling down into more maybe examples of some of the startups that you've interacted with, whether it's ones that, I don't know if you can talk about ones you've invested in, or if not, then ones that you've at least engaged with in some way.
Sure. So in terms of the seed program, we've already executed 7 seeds. For the fund, we only just became operational last month, and we're targeting 3 investments by the end of the year. So for the seed, I could talk to real examples. For the fund, I can also kind of talk to examples of companies in the pipeline, but without obviously giving names. But we focus across Southeast Asia and also South Asia. So it's a fairly wide geographic market. So if you look at the 4 sectors that we're keen on, right? So let's start with clean tech first. So within that space, the kinds of companies that we're interested in include solutions that promote access to energy for the wider population. So for example, off-grid types of solutions. We're also interested in energy efficiency solutions that drive more efficient industry manufacturing processes. So to give you an example, there's a company in India that we're looking at now where they essentially digitize the ESCO model. So I don't know if, for those of you that are not familiar with ESCO, ESCO is energy as a service company. So they're basically companies that have been existed for a long time, and they go in and they'll advise a building or a property developer on how they could optimize energy use. But that business model has never really been able to scale because these guys often find it hard to convince corporates to pay up front. And then they never have enough cash to scale because banks also don't really want to lend to these guys easily. So they tend to stay pretty small and fragmented. So but with technology solutions and AI, it's enabling and IoT, it's enabling a new emergence trend towards digitization of some of these types of ESCO services. And so there's a company in India that we're looking at, which essentially provides energy savings as a service, cooling as a service, an AI solution that helps optimize energy use in hospitals and other property development. And they've gained quite a bit of traction already. So that's one example in the energy efficiency space. We're we're quite also interested in circular economy and ways of recycling waste in different industries and generating value and cleaner manufacturing. So there was a company that we've provided a seed to, which manufactures alternative leather. So they, leather is one of the dirtiest industries. It's very, very water intensive, and it creates a lot of byproducts, pollutant byproducts in the process of coloring. So this company uses pineapple leaf waste from the agricultural industry to manufacture a synthetic alternative leather product to make shoes, handbags, and the like. And although it's still quite a niche market, it's actually gaining traction, especially in Europe and US. This company's got winning some pretty big contracts with some, main street retailers. So we've done a play on them because they manufacture their products in Philippines at the moment and are looking to expand to Indonesia. And maybe just one more example of another company that's also kind of alternative of a new science. It's a Korean technology that, so the brick industry is huge in Asia. I mean, I think Asia as a whole manufactures about 80% of the world's bricks. A lot of that's in China. China actually has food regulations and technological adoption has made the industry a little bit cleaner. But in South Asia, that builds, manufactures about 30% of the bricks, it's still very dirty. They use kilns that burn, you got to delog, deforest, and burn in these kilns the bricks, and it creates a lot of carbon emissions. So this Korean technology is essentially an earth science biotech a chemical that helps to, you mix it with some basic inputs that goes into brick manufacturing, and rather than burning it, it can consolidate and create a alternative brick that's just as hard and durable as a normal brick, but much less polluting. So these guys are expanding in Nepal, and of course our networks include a lot of construction companies, property, real estate developers. So we're helping them to expand and test their solution in that market. Yeah. So these are some examples. I mean, we could go on all day. Like in health tech, we haven't talked about, right? I mean, we've been working with like ministries of health to source. We did an exercise of sourcing post-COVID sort of health technology solutions relevant to safeguarding supply chains of health predictive solutions for helping to predict the spread of diseases post-disaster through airborne, waterborne disease. Fintech, working with banks on, alternative credit scoring types of fintech solutions. So I hope that gives a flavor of what kind of things are interest of us.
Definitely. Wow. You can clearly see the diversity and also the impact in there. And in fact, so speaking of which then, impact, at a more formal level, do you need to measure and assess the impact for, in order to execute your investment, your investment approach? So in other words, when you look at a startup,
yeah, for sure,
some kind of systematic way, you got to assess.
So when we take the money from the investors, because actually I should have mentioned also earlier that for our fund one and our seed, ADB put in funding, but we've also had other third-party investors, primarily Korean and Europeans, that have invested. So it's interesting because it's also kind of a first development financial institution asset management of third-party funding for investing in sort of SDG type investments. So when we took the money, we pledged to, of course, sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that means you do essentially have LPs or limited partners.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So we entered into legal contracts, of course, with these parties about what commercial returns we target and also how we measure the impact. And so we worked with the Andes Institute based out of North America that's led a sort of a coalition of of impact investors to try. It's very difficult, but you just try to look at what everyone is doing and establish good principles to guide. So it's all about being transparent and doing things that are measurable, but also things that will not be too burdensome for early stage companies at an early stage. But yeah, we have specific indicators, and there's a whole impact management process on what data we need to collect and monitor at different stages of a company's growth. So we do have those, yeah.
Are there, because there seems to be sort of an alphabet soup, if you will, of impact measurement, standards, metrics, reporting. It's in quite a bit of flux. And anything sort of in particular that stands out for you, or that you find yourself referring to in particular?
Well, in our case, to be honest, we kept it quite simple. And then there's no like industry standard, so to speak. But we hope maybe if we do it well, then people might look to ADV or how are you guys doing it. So we've kept it pretty simple. We have 5 indicators, and those indicators are, we thought, okay, each one has to be measurable and transparent. So for example, a very specific one is around carbon emissions reduction, climate impact. So that's very, very tangible, and you can be very scientific in how you measure. So if I look back at the examples I gave earlier around, for example, the brick manufacturer, or even the pineapple leaf alternative, we have to, when we do our due diligence on a company, as well as looking at the commercial due diligence, we also have to look at the impact due diligence. So looking at, okay, what for 1 unit of brick or 1 kilo of or 1 ton of bricks manufactured, what are the inputs that go into it, and what's the energy consumption in that process, and how much CO2 is being created, and then what's the alternative in the traditional industry of manufacturing a similar quantity of bricks using traditional methodologies, and then you have your difference, and that difference then becomes your unit impact estimate. And of course that may change over time depending on scale and other factors, but we baseline it on that, and then we say, okay, well, we've pledged as a fund as a whole, we need to reduce 4 million CO2 emissions reduction, and we know that a lot of our investments are likely to fail, so they won't scale. So we need at least 4 or 5 of our investments to be successful and to scale to the point where they at least can reduce 1 million CO2 reductions. So then you look at this particular brick company, and you can immediately kind of get the sense of, okay, they're going to need to scale to this production volume, which will be whatever percentage of this market, or in some cases will require them to expand out of that market into other markets. So, and what will be that exit? Can they really exit at that point, or will it get really capital intensive because they're hardware, and will they need to access debt at a later stage, and will that type of funding be available? So you've got to really look early on, right from the beginning. It's not just about commercial return, but also even if you want impact, you still need these companies to scale. They're not contradictory. They can often be consistent.
That's right.
Yep.
Oh, that's fascinating. And the way you describe it, it's interesting. Is it's you can see parallels to sort of the way VCs think about the financial side, but you're applying it to the impact. You're looking for that. There's implicitly the assumption that there are going to be many teams or many startups that might not make it, but then you're counting on the couple of ones that do to have an outsized impact.
Yes, and it's the same goes for the pain point. If you're pure VC, you're looking at, okay, what's the market size in terms of dollar? Of course, that's fine, and that will apply to us too. But we're also starting off with the basis of what's the national pain point in terms of development, right? So, and even if you look at markets historically like China and India that are maybe more developed in their innovation ecosystem, China started off by solving like payment issues right early on. It's commercial, but also it was a huge development pain point, that you had a huge part of the population that couldn't make basic payments and therefore couldn't access financial services and goods, financial services, right? So whether it's freight, logistics, whatever the pain point is, you got to start with that pain point, and often you'll find that it matches to a huge market size as well.
Wow, fascinating. Wow, wow. And then now to connect to the title of our talk, right? Because we're talking about investing in startups that impact SDGs. Question is, how do you look at, or is there some sort of way to look at linkage between this impact that you described, you're evaluating startups, and then connecting it to the UN Sustainable Development Goals? Oh, and just before you answer that, for the benefit of our audience, just in case there's some folks who are not familiar with SDGs. So these are the UN Sustainable Development Goals that were created back in, I think it was 2015. There's 17 goals to essentially improve the world overall by 2030. And these are in areas including hunger, education, equality, water quality, energy, innovation, et cetera, et cetera. It's a sort of long list of goals at that level. And they translate, or they break down into, I think it's 169 targets, and I think a little over 230 indicators. So from what I understand, ADB Ventures, what you're doing, it has some relation to that. So I was wondering, how do you look at that linkage between the impact that you just described and SDGs ultimately?
So Sam, to be honest, I think you know the SDGs better than me,
Oh,
because
okay.
I don't even know those numbers so precisely. And I think the good thing about SDGs is that they were developed through a very big consensus building exercise. So in a sense, you've managed to mobilize and convene all the governments in the world, huge parts of the private sector, to agree on what's important. But then, of course, the downside is that the SDGs cover everything, and
Yes.
so there's not really any prioritization either. And so you can justify doing almost anything and still contribute to the SDG. And if you look at the 250 whatever indicators they have, some indicators are just not really measurable, or they're hard to measure, or they may be not relevant to a business model. So I guess we've gone through, so we had to focus first. And so I guess largely our first fund is focused on climate impact, so to speak, and you could say that's action 13, SDG 13. Within climate, it's picking out indicators that are very measurable, around what is the target population, how many people, CO2 reductions, and really mapping. So we've mapped only 5 indicators. All our 5 indicators are indicators from the SDG list, but there are only 5 of the 256. But you've got to focus somewhere, because in the end, back to the fundamentals of a venture fund, it's about portfolio diversification. And
Yes.
so if you try to do too much and you're not focused enough, it's going to be very difficult to diversify, because you're not spreading risk in a way, right? You're just doing everything. So
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Very clear. Very clear. Okay. I think I'm going to sort of stop there from our own little conversation, and maybe open it up to our audience, in case there are questions out there. And with the help of our senior advisor here at the Sustainability and Entrepreneurship Center, Alex Mavro, if you could please help vet or raise some of the questions from the audience.
Yeah, Sam, I put a message in the chat box soliciting questions, and haven't seen any. So I think Dominic was just all too captivating for them.
That's
Well
good.
done, well done. But now, as you say, is a good time for people to try to gather their thoughts and come up with any questions they may have. This is a great opportunity for somebody who's dealing in this level of activity in both spheres, the entrepreneurship and the sustainability levels, to take advantage of his experience. By the way, Dominic, are you going to be here in Bangkok for a while longer, or what's the plan, or do you even have a plan at this point?
I have a long-term contract here, but I mean, who knows? It's hard to plan at the moment, right? So everything's in flux around visas and flights and everything. So yeah, just take it month by month. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, not trying to make commit or ask you to commit or anything, but I
Yeah.
thought maybe you were
Yeah.
just passing through and got caught here by the activity. So you actually assigned here? Is that it?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
I'm assigned here. Normally I would be on the road all the time because I cover Southeast Asia, and I'm also fundraising for Fund 2 for ADB Ventures. So, you know, that involves going to Europe, North America. So in a way, I'm very, COVID's a really bad thing, of course, but, you know, it's being in one place for a long period has actually not been all downside for me. It's just been nice to be in one place. Yeah.
Understand. We have Raphael. He's just fired a question across, I see. He asked if you could, well, his question is, I don't know if you can see it or not, Dominic. It says, as ADB is having strong ties with governments, could you please elaborate on how your work might be connected to creating discourse and fostering a country innovation agencies? So here you're looking at
Yep.
the policy level.
I think I've got it. Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, I can see the question too. So yeah, I work within ADB's private sector operations department, which is about 20% of operations. But within ADB, we also have the public sector operations department, which is about 80% of ADB's total operations. And then we also have another department that does all the knowledge and advisory sort of types of services. So we have teams that are involved more on innovation ecosystem building. And so their role is providing technical assistance, advisory to governments on you know, what's best practice. And we also convene and bring together governments from different countries. You know, some of our members include countries like Singapore and Korea that want to share their experience of how they develop their innovation ecosystem. So we organize lots of events, bringing people together so that they can share. Yeah, so I think I'm invited to Vietnam on the 25th of November, for example, for a government venture summit to share about you know, ADB Ventures and what else ADB is doing to stimulate venture investment in the region. So that's not our core is investing, and we can't get too distracted because we have a small team, but there's lots of other parts of ADB also working on these types of exercises. I know enough about them that if you guys have questions, I'm happy to also talk to broader, you know, innovation ecosystem building and other things that ADB is doing aside from investing. But I'm just responsible for the investment side.
I see. I'm scrolling through here. Somebody just sent me one on the queue on directly, I think.
Yeah.
No, the second one, that's
open. Should I just go one by one?
Yeah,
or?
Please do.
Okay, yeah. So I think the next question was like the same. I think it's also from Raphael. Just quickly, on a practical level, how much startup advisory do we provide? The answer to that is we can only really afford to provide support direct to companies if we're serious about investing in them, or we might want to invest in them, or they're part of our portfolio. Because you know, there's thousands and thousands of companies out there, and you know, advisory costs time and resources, and you know, we have limited time and resources. So, you know, if we see that there's a company that has the potential for us to invest, yes, we can support them through connections, through our industry knowledge. But you know, for the broader ecosystem and the hundreds of startups out there, we can support indirectly. So during my time in working on Myanmar, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, we worked with the government and private sector to help build out local infrastructure. Like when I was in Ho Chi Minh City, we brought in these guys in Singapore that set up Block 71 and clustered around, you know, all the different venture support programs in one space. We helped Ho Chi Minh City to build out their sort of equivalent. We helped them set up a local incubator. And we did the same in Da Nang. We've worked with Cambodia in the same capacity. So usually there we would, for the sustainability of it, we have to support and work with a local partner that's the intermediary that's providing those services. If we do it ourselves, it's not going to be sustainable. The next question is, what are the main, sorry,
Before
yeah,
you get to that, there's another one asking, do you have any Thai examples, an example of countries, companies in Thailand, or maybe sectors in Thailand that you work with?
Yeah, so I think in Thailand, we, although we've met with the National Innovation Agency, if you look at Thailand, I don't think you guys are, relatively speaking, short on funding. You're a relatively rich country in terms of as emerging market, at least compared to some of the neighbors in the Mekong region. So, I think for us, it's more about how can we add value and support government and private sector for our network. So to give you a few examples concretely of what we've done in Thailand. So we we co-funded together with the National Innovation Agency and the NEST Accelerator Program, a specific agri-tech accelerator program called AgGrowth that was looking at helping to test, deploy, and scale agricultural technology solutions. And that program also had some corporate partners like Kubota. This year, we also co-funded a program with the private sector supporting sustainable tourism and circular economy. So we had some companies that were in the corporate hospitality industry in Thailand, like Jetwing, Hilton. The hotel chains were looking for energy efficiency solutions, circular economy solutions to make the tourism industry greener, cleaner. That was gaining a lot of tractions, and we were getting into doing pilots. But unfortunately, with COVID Hilton actually had to downsize their sort of CSR department, and we lost our key focal there. But I think there's still a longer-term general commitment, even in the tourism industry, to these things. So those are some examples of what we're doing. So sorry, there's a lot of questions now.
Right. You can scroll right on down. Pick and choose as you like.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'll just go one by one, whichever. So I think from Mingle Corp project team, what is the main criteria of impact creation you're looking for the program during the period? So for ADB Ventures Fund 1, we have 5 specific indicators. I think I mentioned earlier that it's CO2 emissions reduction. The second one is around climate resilience. So there are certain groups that are more vulnerable to climate. So climate changes, weather, temperature, which affects, for example, agricultural productivity. So we target groups like farmers and agricultural SMEs to help stabilize their income through risk financial management products, microinsurance, access to credit. We also look to benefit population groups around reduced pollution. Technologies to improve air quality, recycle plastic waste, sort of around circular economy. That's another area that we support. Yeah, so those are some examples. The next one is, what do you think about the challenges in supply chain in the Mekong region countries? Have you seen any interesting solutions yet? Yes. But of course, supply chains are very different from industry to industry. So if you take the exact, I talked earlier about health industry supply chains, and also there's the agricultural supply chain. So if you look at agricultural supply chains, there's huge challenges. Even before COVID, there was challenges around 30% of the food we grow is lost during the transportation process. So we call that post-harvest losses. So we're seeing a lot of interesting farm-to-fork solutions, agricultural marketplace platforms to more efficiently connect buyers to producers to distributors, traceability solutions that also allow us to trace, logistics, coldware, freight solutions. All of these solutions are solutions that we're actively looking at potentially investing in, and we see huge potential in the food processing agricultural industry. Yeah. So I don't know if that, and I think if you look at Mekong, you can't look much further than food supply and agricultural supply chains. The next question is, with the goal to make impact to SDGs, with the goal to make impact to SDGs, what is the metric results for the short term? I think I kind of touched on that a bit earlier around what are the indicators. Personally, I'm focusing on clean energy sector that has technologies related, but to get metric results, it's kind of hard as we're working in long-term goals. So I think it's impossible to predict with accuracy. It's like trying to predict what will be the return on my VC, my individual project investment. All we can really do is we look at it similar to normal VC, but applying an impact lens. How big is the market size? How big is the development problem? Are you really tackling a pain point which is relevant to the industry? You can't say that brick. Going back to the brick example, we know that if we crack it, it's going to be huge, but how huge? Does it matter if we're reducing carbon emissions by 1 million or 2 million or 3 million or 5 million? No, the more the better, but we do want to be able to say with confidence that this company has the potential to scale and solve a huge industry problem. And we're betting on this company because if they're successful, they're going to easily generate 1 million CO2 emissions reduction and maybe a lot more even. Yeah. So, and we focus on calculating what is the unit impact. So whatever you invest in, you want to at least be able to understand what's the unit impact, right? If it's an energy efficiency solution for a building, if they apply it to this building, how much energy reduction will they on average generate? And then you start to get a sense of, okay, how much they have to scale to generate that return you want.
Excuse me, there's somebody who's holding up Kuntirapon. Are you trying to ask a question? I don't see your hand up, but I've got a message that you've raised your hand. Are you there?
Oh, I already asked my questions, but just to elaborate on the questions, with COVID, still going on, do you have a strategy as how you can work with the startup and how you can be more disruptive in terms of getting startup to look at when you mentioned like food traceability and also focusing on like energy efficiency, and is there another theme that you're looking for in the the mid of the crisis?
Yeah, so I would say that a lot of the themes that we were already looking at pre-COVID still, we believe, hold. And in some, we actually had we organized our own event just earlier today, actually, with 500 startups around sort of post-COVID technology for resilience. And we had a number of entrepreneurs on that session, including some companies that we've done seeds or exploring investments. And nearly all of them are saying that, like, there was one agriculture marketplace in India that was saying, if anything, COVID has accelerated business for them because people have, physical contact, physical travel is becoming harder, whether it's traveling into urban areas to see specialists at the hospital or transporting products and services. So any technology that can shorten the supply chain, make it more efficient and help product services to be distributed is going to generate impact probably by reducing food waste or other efficiencies, but also it's going to at the same time generate impact, and also for commercial reasons purely, companies will be wanting to solve these problems. So I think, but in the health industry specifically, I think you could say that there are trends that are being accelerated. Before COVID, ministries of health, particularly the public sector, they recognized the issue of needing to be more proactive in predicting spread of diseases. But now they're much more open to investing more in this area and piloting solutions. There's political pressures there. And you're seeing a lot more VC money going into health industry in these areas. Telemedicine, that's making it possible to serve remote communities. So I could go on with examples, but I think, I guess one problem, not problem, but in the area, in the area of sustainability, which is about, environment and clean environment, I would say that while in the long term, these pain points still hold, and we still are very optimistic about the longer term outlook. In the short term, it is also, these companies are facing a lot of cash flow problems, and they're, particularly if they have hardware components attached to the business. So unfortunately, we are seeing quite a few companies that are vulnerable to the immediate downturn. In Western countries, I think in the UK, and I saw a program where the government actually provided credit facilities to support these companies in the short term, because they saw that these industries take time to build up and they're still very nascent. And if the industry collapsed through lack of funding in the short term, it may put back a lot of the progress that's been made, and you've got to kind of rebuild. Unfortunately, in Asia, I don't see a lot of those. There's probably other priorities for public sector programs at the moment. So there might be some industries that do get affected and do get hurt. So I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of jumped around a bit, but.
Did you see the question from Ralph Chitakun? The goal to make impact on the SDGs for the metric results in short term when you're actually looking at the long term in your own.
Yeah. So I from is it Chatikul? I think I started answering that question, and then his last question was if large organizations like ADB could set up these metrics.
Yes.
Startup solutions and providers could focus on their goals easier.
Right.
Well, we can, the goals at least that we target and the metrics that we target is available on our website, and I'd be happy to share that. We have to be very transparent about how we measure and what we target, but that's not to say that like what we target are the most important metrics. There might be other, I didn't talk about, for example, gender inclusion. There's a whole lot of funding out there that's focused on just investing in gender inclusion, looking at, do businesses consider equality from along the supply chain in terms of their customer? Are they targeting female customers? Are they generating employment back with supply chain? So there's lots and lots of, I think in the end, you've also got to kind of, follow your dream and what you're passionate about, but also what's the money following, right? Because a lot of the impact investment funds are sourced from investors that want to make a difference and generate impact aside from commercial returns. So I think you're seeing a lot of climate funding in the market now also, because increasingly there are investors that are interested in investing in these issues. Also, we're seeing an actual growing trend towards also corporates, ventures and corporates that are looking at also investing in this area. And because we're a co-investor, so we also had to ask ourselves the question of who are we going to co-invest with? So a lot of the deals that we're looking at in our pipeline, we're seeing corporates that are wanting to co-invest with us. They see our networks are across the whole region. Their networks might be more focused on a particular country. That's often the discussion we have, for example, with Thai corporates. We're not going to have better networks than Thai corporates in Thailand, but Thailand's a small market. So eventually when these companies expand out of Thailand into Vietnam or other countries, we can be a strategic co-investor. Family offices, impact funds, angel investor syndicates. So these are all different pools that we look to invest, and we have to understand what they're looking for as well and how they measure impact. There's one more question from Raphael is, yes. Can you please share some words on the ADB Ventures Plug and Play Tech Center platform? So we've partnered and worked to Plug and Play now with for a couple of years, trying out different things and learning about them, and they've been learning about us. But in the end, we're trying to marry our respective strengths. So Plug and Play has a fairly deep process expertise on running corporate innovation programs and sourcing global technology solutions. But they all recognize also that their venturing into Asia is fairly new. They're building up their presence here, but their networks are probably deeper in North America and Europe and more developed markets. And So our networks are more in the region. You know, we have deep networks across for B2B and B2G or B2B to C models across the region. So we're coming together, we're bringing our networks, they're bringing their process expertise. We're bringing, of course, our resourcing, both for the market validation and for the funding. And so next year, we're going to be working on a partnership that really cuts across multiple sectors and platforms, including agri-tech, including clean technology solutions, health technology solutions, and you know, we'll see how it goes. But the program's success will be measured by how many proof of concept opportunities we generate for these types of companies, how many corporate partners we can entice into these programs, how many seeds, markets, validation pilots we can do successfully, and ultimately how much funding we can catalyze into these types of companies.
Metawi has asked you another question. I think you can see it there.
Yes, I can see. How would you say your return on an investment? So is it social return on investment? Is it the
Yes,
SIR? Yeah. Or social SIA is a social impact assessment, or in turn,
Yes.
is that
Yes.
play a role in your decision making to invest in a project startup? What benchmarks do you use? So every investment we make follows a four-stage investment process. So we're quite similar to an ordinary VC in that we follow a funnel from doing lighter touch initial DD at the top end of the funnel, and we deepen that DD right down, and we go through our own fund investment committee through to approval. And the more you look, the more serious you get about investing in the company, the more DD you do, and this whole process takes 3 to 4 months. Impact is embedded in every stage of this four-stage process. But similar to the commercial due diligence, the level of DD we do also gets deeper as you get more serious about investing in the company. So we get hundreds, more than 1,000 leads a year. And so the very first cut is what we just call first cut. And there we look at the very basic fundamentals on the impact side. We look at a company and we ask ourselves, does this company have the potential to contribute to the 5 impact indicators that we're trying to deliver on? And we make a quick decision on yes or no, or maybe. If it's a maybe or yes, we then allocate a deal officer to do further DD on the company. That often involves 1 or 2 conversations with the company to further learn about the company and to validate whether this company really can generate impact and whether it aligns to also our commercial criteria. At that point, then internally, we do a snapshot of the company and we discuss as a team around, okay, is this company worth pursuing? And if it is, what product, where might it fit? Is it more of a fund 1 direct investment? Is it maybe a seed? Or how might we be able to support this company? And if we decide to pursue it further, we then deepen it into we got to develop the further DD. On the impact side, that's when we start getting into estimating the unit impact cost. If it wasn't for COVID, that often involves a site visit to the company, look at their product, ask them for some evidence of their claims. And then we may test it with some of our in-house experts that are also working in these industries. And then that's how we validate the impact. And then once we've made an investment, of course, when we process the investment, there's a lot of background, what you call social impact assessment that gets attached to it. We do a climate assessment, we do a gender assessment, we categorize the investment by our social safeguards. Are there risks around social risks, environmental risks of investing in this company? We have to do the integrity due diligence on the governance, all of those things. But it's lighter touch than what we would do for a larger investment. And then once we've invested, it's just a case of like quarterly reviews, annual check-ins, and maybe doing an audit at the end of our investment to validate whether our unit impact estimate at the beginning was accurate. I hope that answers that question. The next question is, yeah. How much would you say? Oh, sorry, I think I've answered that one. I think I've actually answered all the questions.
I think you have. I think you have. I just wanted
Yep.
to offer the audience one last chance. If they have something, raise your hand or shout out or take advantage, one last advantage, one opportunity to take advantage of your time with us. And we'll give you a few seconds. You got them all speechless still. Wow.
I
I think
I have
they're just hungry.
question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'd be interested to talk to Dominique more. I think after the session about the co-investment in ag technology, because that's what we are actually working on, the food traceability platform, and we're starting in Thailand, and we might, we actually plan to do a regional expansion. I think given COVID, it's really hard to to it limits our mobility, to Cambodia, to Myanmar, and possibly Vietnam. So I think I would like to maybe have a chance to have a chat with you afterward, if you have time, or can do
We
that.
can link you up,
Thank you.
Jirapon, if you're not already in touch with him. We can get you
Yeah.
together. No problem.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that maybe I can send Sam has my contacts, but I can send him also a little bit of information on ADV Ventures to summarize, and then he can distribute it together with my email. I'm still seeing some questions coming through new, which I haven't answered, but I guess I could answer them through email, or how do you suggest, Sam? Or do you want me to just quickly touch on them now? Or
I think we should probably stop here just to out of consideration for your time, because you've been very generous with your time. So yes, for any other people who would like to ask questions, please feel free to contact us offline, and we'll also be sharing some of the other information and contact from Dominic as he suggested. So thank you so much, Dominic. This has been incredibly fruitful. I mean, really, truly, genuinely love this conversation. It's so appropriate for our theme and for this time. So thank you again so much.
Khun Sam,
no,
we have the
sorry, go ahead.
last question for Khun Chris, because Chris has raised his hand. Is that possible?
I can follow up later.
Yeah, please.
No worries, Khun Sam.
It's just we know you too, so let's connect offline, please. Just to
I'd just like to also say thanks for having me on. It's been an honor to participate in this, and thanks for great questions. When you get asked great questions, it also helps you to think a bit more about what you do and how you can further improve our program. So thank you very much, and I hope I can interact with some of you during my stay in Thailand. So feel free to be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you also to our audience so much for your questions, for your engagement, for your interests. Look forward to seeing you again sometime in the near future. All right.
So for the last thing for today, I would like to thank you for Khun Dominic Miller and Khun Surabat from your team for speaking today here. And we have another events, like we would like to share the screen with you. So in the 5th second with the next event. So the next event will be that related to Khun Dominic just mentioned about the closing the loop. And we have like a very special guest. And this will be on 26th of November, which is in the next month. We will screen the movie Closing the Loop that was produced and also was participated by Wayne Witzel, and he's the visiting professor in Satsin, and he will join for the next event by Zoom. Because of the COVID, he couldn't come here, but he will join for the panelists and join for the talk after the screening the movie. So please join us next event, and thank you very much for today. And we would like to have the feedback from you, from our honored guest today. And please scan in these QR codes and let us know what you are thinking about the event and what kind of topics that you want to share, or what kind of topics that you want to know or discuss about. So please let us know. So I will give some minutes about the scanning the QR codes. And also please follow us in the social network about SEC Sustainability and Entrepreneurship Center via Instagram and also Twitter and Facebook. So you will not miss any opportunities. Okay, I just give 1 minute and then we are about to close the event. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, everyone that participate until now, and see you next time with our next events. And tonight, I'm really thank you to you too. Bye bye. Good night. สวัสดีค่ะ
Good night.